Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick from Blind, and today I'm going to introduce you to Jeff Bogdan, who spent more than 30 years in product development at Microsoft. Jeff, I know you've had such an illustrious career, so I want to give it up to you to walk us through your career. Can you do that for our audience here?
Well, first of all, Rick and Jack, thanks for having me on. This is I'm excited at the opportunity here. Yeah, okay, I'll do it succinctly as best I can do for 30 years. Started as an engineer, as a coder, as a programmer, a hacker, whatever you wanted to call it. The technical term is software engineer. That's changed a few times over the years, but let's just say software engineer. Did that for what they say IC, individual contributor. So spent the first 5 years doing that. Windows was my product, so I interned at Microsoft in '90, working on Windows. Came back full time on Windows. Loved it. I mean, Win95 was certainly a was one of the early highlights. That was just a product where we brought Windows came to the consumer. We always talked about Brad's mom. Brad was the leader of the team. We always asked the question of, is this good for Brad's mom? Because up till that point, everything we were doing with all this software was mainly for the geeks, for the industry, but not for the home. And the mission statement of a computer on every desk in every home was where we were looking at making it relevant to the consumer.
Is that, I don't
So,
mean to, is that why
yep.
in '95 you had the Rolling Stones come out there?
Well,
And
I mean,
was that?
the marketing of it, I mean, it's the start button was why they
Yeah.
have the Rolling Stones, because it was Start Me Up. And the start button was basically this redoing of the entire interface to make it more approachable,
Mhm.
because it was, we always said it was functional, you had everything, but you couldn't necessarily find it. It wasn't intuitive. And the idea when we got to Win95 was saying, what is more intuitive to the consumer? And then from there, went into other various products, but that's where I started experimenting with being a manager. And the nice thing about it was the manager allowed me to, I kind of went back and forth. I'll do some individual contributor, I'll do some manager. I'm missing the technical and I'll go back to the engineering. But the key products that I then finally latched on another 5 years later to saying, no, management is clearly for me. And when I discovered that was having people under me, some of my reports, that I looked at their technical output and said, "Oh, you don't want me doing it. You're doing far better than I can do there. And what you need is the soft skills, and where I can help is the people side." So that's where I really went 100% on the management side, and that's where the products that were part of that were Zune and Windows Phone were kind of the two. There were other products that I had worked on, but those two were kind of the more the bigger and more impactful in terms of what we were doing at the company and things we were exploring, and also in my role about being recognizing more of the scope growth I could have as a manager. So went on that. I've always been more user interface has been my focus. User interface is all the buttons, the menus, the widgets, everything that you're playing with, rather than the behind the scenes deeper code. That's always been my forte. And so after those products, I went back to user interface platform in Windows. So I returned to Windows. And then at the 30-year mark, I said, I think I've done everything I can do as an engineer, and I want to try something different, which is when I created a role. I defined a role that was learning and development for the team. And that's what I spent the last 3 years at the company doing.
How was it like? Turn back the clock. It was like, early '90s. It was still new. Was it a work hard, play hard type of thing at Microsoft, or like what was the vibe there? And it
Yeah.
was different than it is 30 plus years later.
Yeah. I mean, that's, it's different. I mean, my experience is different now. The question is, I mean, let's find a new hire out of college and ask them if it feels the same. I think it's different because, and it was, you said work hard, play hard. That was our mantra at work. And it wasn't I think when you hear work hard, play hard, there's always like the taskmaster, crack the whip. There's that connotation. So you can imagine that as we refined things, maybe we didn't use that term so much. Work-life balance became what we were talking about, but work hard, play hard really was. I know at some point they were telling us what the average age of the employees were. When I started, it was 8,000 employees. And I feel like they said the average employee age was like 28, 26. It was somewhere there. I'm assuming now the average age is, easily in the 30s. I think I saw a stat that was like 34 for Microsoft. And now we're 200,000 employees. But the feeling back then was it was an extension of college. You had a ton of imports. You had a ton of people coming in. I was an import from Virginia that we were all relocated out here. We had what was called Orphan Thanksgiving, where for the Thanksgivings that we didn't return home, we all got together and it was you do this dish, you do that dish, and it was 30 people picking someone else's place to go have our Thanksgivings. But that model of an extension of college was in college, you really didn't delineate between what was the school day and what was the play day. Everything kind of meshed together. You were taking an evening class and you were playing Ultimate before that or whatever. And everything was kind of mixed together. And the way I would describe my first probably 5 years, it was we spent the day at Microsoft on campus, or with our campus family. It wasn't that I would wake up and go to work and I would leave when it was time to go to bed. So there was at one point where my apartment, I cooked dinner for myself one time in a year in that apartment, because we just were always hanging out together. And it didn't mean that I went to work at 8 and sat at my desk until 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. It was, we would go play volleyball. We would go watch a movie. We had bad movie night for every Monday. When there was a crappy movie, we would all go get some tequila. We'd have some margaritas to warm us up for this bad movie, then go watch the movie. So, but then there was the intense part of that too, which was, you're getting in crunch mode. You're getting close to shipping your product. And yeah, then maybe those days it was 8 to 10, you were all sitting at your desk, but it really fluctuated. And it was just, it was the work hard, play hard didn't balance out every day. There was times when it was an entire month of work hard. There would be for Win95, the last year, we had dinner catered every night, because it was kind of like, hey, we're going to make this simpler for you. Don't worry about figuring out what you're going to eat. Just stay here, eat this, and get back to work.
Now, I'm curious in terms of how work must have evolved, because even when you joined early on, what you're describing seems to be the archetypal, like classic startup feel, which surprises me because at that time Microsoft was already so large and so established. What do you think it was about the company culture that led to that kind of collegial atmosphere that you were describing?
I mean, my average age is certainly part of that. The more
Okay.
the more collegial we have, right? I mean, now it's you go. I met my wife at work. There were many people there are Microsoft couples, many of them. And so then once we started having kids, then it was okay. Well, we can't have that atmosphere. I counter the work hard, play hard. That was great, and that was, I think, for the time, for those of us that were fresh out of school, I think it fit. And I'll see now there are some people coming in from college, and you'll see groups of people that have kind of glommed together and are behaving that way. And you can see that they just, they're living with their work family, that the day in, day out, they're doing things with that family. So some of that is happening, but I think that once you dilute it enough with us with our kids, then that does change the overall dynamic. Because the dinners, like a dinner was a perfect opportunity of you just sitting around, shooting the breeze with people. And if people have to get home to get their kid to baseball practice, soccer practice, and whatever other activity, then that's going to interrupt those type of that way of bonding. And so you created other ways of doing the team bonding.
Rick, how's it feel? What's the vibe on Blind? Because there's like literally millions of people out there who are software engineers, software developers. does it come across that they had the same feel that Jeff went through, or is it a big change?
Yeah, I would say that more recently there has been a lot more focus on work-life balance, right? People are seeking out work schedules to provide them autonomy to pick their schedule in terms of
Mm.
whether they want to work on premise or at home. And so you're seeing a lot of these kind of, I would say, like cultural quirks that I would say come from that work schedule, right? Where people are naturally behind their computers. Perhaps it's a lot easier to be meaner or just more direct to folks, right? Where you might be saying things that you wouldn't say face to face to another person. Or alternatively, there is that ease in terms of, oh, it's 6 p.m. I just need to shut my laptop lid and I'm off to, the rest of the world, and you're disconnecting earlier. And so perhaps there's fewer, serendipitous moments in terms of understanding how the other person works, or even the generation of new ideas. So it kind of goes both ways, I would say. And folks on Blind, they're kind of struggling with that, because there's some folks that like it one way, and certainly others that like it the other.
I think, Jeff, it looks like you like the mix of everything.
Well, that was, excuse me, I went to get my water and knocked myself down there. That was a fall out of my chair moment,
Yeah.
Rick. Thank you.
No one noticed. Don't worry. It's all right. So it seems like, I bet you, it seems like you like that integration, Jeff, right? Like of seamlessly moving in and out of work and play, as opposed to, it sounds now like what Rick is saying. Wait, and how many like software engineers do you have on the platform? Like at this point, you have Rick, do you have a guess?
Yeah, it would be over 6 million.
It's great. So like, so you could get some good data on that, and that it just doesn't seem that they do the same thing that Jeff did then, right? It seems.
Yeah, and what I would tell people is, for everything that was good about work hard, play hard, the downside was there wasn't structure, there wasn't organization to how I approached work. So I am diagnosed ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I never medicate. I tried medication at one point, but I grew up in a family where my dad was military, and so it was always coping skills. It was, get your stuff together and get yourself organized. And so the challenge in work hard, play hard, I succeeded, I advanced, I was getting promoted, but it was never predictably, and it was never something where I felt like I was intentionally moving in that direction. It was, well, I'm taking on more projects and I'm getting more done, and therefore I'm getting promoted. And that really came from this work hard, play hard was just, it was okay for me, but I realized later on, once I applied structure, which for me, it was the necessity of, we had kids, and it meant, no, you can't just, there aren't just more hours in the day. You can't just add time to this. And so that, when that structure came in for me, that there was a great discipline shift, self-discipline shift for me, where and maybe you two have experienced this before. I mean, I think it's true for everyone who, when you go from a 10-hour day to an 8-hour day, you don't get less stuff done. You just realize, oh no, in this time I'm just dialed in. And so I ended up, what was all mushed together, I am now an advocate for the exact opposite. It is, everything is time boxed. It is serially single task, one thing at a time. And what's the Parks and Recreation? There's Ron Swanson's line: never half-ass two things, whole-ass one thing. And so, and so that is, I mean, I give classes at Microsoft, gave classes at Microsoft. I still have to learn to speak past tense about that, about this kind, about that structure. And so it is interesting. I was nodding a whole bunch as Rick was explaining this coming and going. And Rick, you said that the blind population is challenged by this remote, and I would say the industry, if not the entire society, is challenged by it, because we were forced into that, but nothing has forced us out of it. So everybody is trying to figure out what does work long term. And you'll see different companies, it's all a grand experiment. And there's companies saying, no, I don't know what's different now. Something's different. And I know that it didn't feel this way when people were in the office. So get back here. But that's knee jerk. And, there's a lot of learning that we've done of, we've been pretty successful remote, but not 100%. The thriving, your serendipity, the unintended or the unplanned moments, the water cooler chat, running into someone on your way to lunch, that wasn't just a random, hey Bob, how are you doing? But it's those serendipitous connections that lead to a work innovation, lead to two teams connecting on a shared project. That is the challenge, that, figuring out how to set that up again, how to bring that back without saying the only way it can happen is for everyone to come back to the office. Because, it's somewhere in the middle. Right now, at the time that I left the company, we were very, very hybrid. I mean, I'd say it's probably, 30% would be 30% would be in the office overall, 70% at home. I'm just saying overall time in the office. That's a made up stat. Don't hold me to that.
Did
Now,
you?
I'm curious in
Okay.
terms of you mentioning as you kind of matured in your career and had spent more time at Microsoft, you had to think about how to be more purposeful, how to set up these standards or structures around your work. How did you find those principles, those structures, those frameworks that allowed you to do that? Because I imagine in those early days, it must have been a difficult shift from going from, spending most of your day at Microsoft to saying, oh gosh, how do I time box things to 8 hours, 2 hours, or, whatever that might be in terms of, getting your work done?
Yeah, the cool thing about Microsoft early on, what was a big attractor to those of us coming out of college at the time, was we were other jobs. I had interned with a Department of Defense company back east. We subcontracted for IBM. There was always this idea of, punching the clock. There was still kind of it was a regular routine, and Microsoft said from the beginning, we don't care about what hours you work. We care about results you produce. And you did have wildly different schedules from that. So me applying a structure was just me at my own pace deciding to do it. You saw there were plenty of people to learn from, and your whole point of serendipitous is just by being around people, you could model. You had other people modeling things, and you could riff off of that and stop them and say, "This is different for you. Tell me more about it." And so there was a lot of learning that we were doing from each other. But it was very much, there was no external pressure on that. I mean, it was talking to your manager and saying, well, let's talk about promotion track. Let's talk about what's next for you. And as they're highlighting problems, a key theme in all of my connects was, Jeff's great until he's not great. Like we don't hit, my output was not regular. And that was, again, let's go back to the ADHD. Let's go back to this kind of loosey goosey schedule for me that it didn't fit well for me. So when they said, well, this is okay, like you're compensating for it in a lot of ways with the output that you have, but these higher levels, and talk about a manager is, if you have a bad day, your team has a bad day. There's a predictability that is needed once you get into management. And I think that's a lot of what highlighted for me, like, wow, I can't keep doing what I was doing. And I think that's more of the message to me that said, it's my turn for me to make this change. Everybody, I think, would do it at their own pace, but it certainly is something that, what would you do differently? That, that standard question that they ask. Well, I would go back and I would say, start artificially, time boxing, start doing it now, pretend you don't have all these hours, and what do you get done? I think that's probably the only change I would make. Everything else has worked out beautifully, but my predictability, once I did that, that disappeared from my reviews. It was, he is dependable. I show up, I say I'm going to do it, and I can do it. And that energy management, I can't remember an old author that talked about, it wasn't time management, it's energy management. But getting that dialed in on the time boxing really started amping up the energy, where you get this flywheel spinning, and just, I could just rip through things.
So can you share people who are not familiar with time boxing? Because that seems to be something that really helped you
Yeah.
get focused and get your career, to the next level. And so
Yeah.
what should we do?
What's the Pomodoro? The Pomodoro technique is, I think I was doing this well before I ever heard that term.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't say that mine is exactly that, but the idea is, whether or not it's Pomodoro, maybe that's a trigger or a PTSD. I won't use that phrase, but what happens inevitably is you will say, do anything professionally long enough, and you'll eventually say, how much difference can I make in 15 minutes? And you start discounting the time that you have. You just say, like, well, stuff's going to get done, but it doesn't really happen in this immediate. It's just, things are going to happen over time, and you kind of slow down on things. And the time boxing is flipping that around to say, remind yourself of how productive you can be when all you do for 15 minutes, for 20 minutes, for 30 minutes is one thing. You turn everything else off. You're sitting in a separate space. You don't have distractions, which obviously I'm describing all this, and now think of what happens in March of 2020, where you've destroyed any concept of separate space.
Mhm.
But I would always, like, it was a separate space, single space, single use. And the idea that what we did in the office when it was meeting time, we all stood up from this desk, from this productivity sanctuary of ours. We stood up and we walked into a meeting, and then we came back. But the idea of virtual meetings means I'm sitting in this same environment with all these same dev coding type of intrusions hitting me while I'm trying to have a meeting with you. Like it, and inevitably, like, so we're undermining that focus. And so that's a lot of what the time boxing is. Pick whatever length of time you're good at, you're comfortable with, set the timer, and have absolutely nothing else going on. The timer is going to rescue you. So you're not sitting there while you're working on this project thinking, do I have 5 minutes? Do I have 10 minutes?
Mhm.
No, the timer's going to bing. And when the timer bings, you got 5 minutes to wrap up and you got to get out.
And then
And
what do you
doing
do
that
next?
is amazingly freeing to your brain, because
Huh?
you're not going to lose.
Do you stop and just take a break after that, or you go on to the next time box?
Yeah. I mean, breaks are fine. You can do. I think most of the time it would be a break. It's get up and go to the water cooler, grab yourself, something to drink, or restroom, whatever, bio break. Yeah, but certainly but you can see what, like, if you're feeling it, sometimes you're in the zone and you're like, well, you go back to your schedule, you look at what's left, what time you've got, and say, I'm going right back in, I'm rolling.
You bring something up that I think a lot of people don't talk about, because I have some ADHD myself. And Rick, I don't know if you do. And it's weird because I'll be doing, let's say, writing an article, and then I'll get distracted by something. And then now I'm looking at, oh, I wanted to buy this stock. And then I look at, oh, wait, I got to feed my dog. And it's like,
Yeah.
you get all over the place. And sometimes it works. Tell me, Jeff, you have this experience. Sometimes it works great because, like, you're just so into it at what you're doing, and you're like, wow, you're killing it. And then you're doing something else, and you could juggle 10 different things, and you're like a hero. Other times you do a crap job at 10 different things because you're just juggling. Is that?
Yeah. You said, I've got a little bit of ADHD. Well, I believe I have to find the research on this. I'm
Yeah.
sure someone has done it. I'm pretty sure that tech and social media and all this has basically brought ADHD to all of us. I'm pretty sure
Yes.
that the entire population now has a little bit of it. Of course, this is not an expert opinion. Don't quote me on this. But what it does mean is those of us who have lived with it all their lives become experts around managing your attention. Tony Crabb is a colleague I've worked with from Microsoft. He's independent, but he wrote the book Busy, and in there he's saying it's not about getting everything done. It is about managing your attention, and being intentional about where you focus. That, I think, is great.
Now, I'm curious in terms of your career progression at Microsoft, in terms of working on kind of larger and larger projects. You mentioned this kind of increasing your scope. How did that happen? Was it someone tapping you along the shoulder and saying, "Hey, I think you would be great at this, Jeff. Why don't you come and work on this project?" Or was it something where you had to kind of seek out those opportunities and try to find those kind of big projects like Zune or Windows Phone?
And it's a mix. There's times when you're asked, and there's times when you spot it and go after it yourself. So it is that mix. The idea for me, uh, this idea of being a leader, of recognizing when you actually are in more of a leadership role. And there's a question that I'll ask new hires of like, de- describe when do you consider yourself being a leader? When will you consider yourself being a leader at this company? And and ask and if they can't answer that, then start to give them, is it 10 years? Is it 5 years? Is it when you're a manager of managers, like, or just a manager at all? What determines when you're a leader? And the punchline is you're supposed to just recognize that there's always leadership opportunities. And we talk about there's a term SME, subject matter expert. And I'll tell new hires, everyone is a subject matter expert of something, and like recognize what that is. And so this gets to differentiation, all that. Recognize what it is, where do you bring value, and where is there an opportunity in the company to add that value uniquely. And so the SME part, I think, is something. And as an example for the new hires, we had new hires coming in right after COVID started. These were new hires that their plan was to move to Redmond and start at Microsoft, but they were all sitting at home. And I told them, like 3 months in, as we're all kind of trying to figure out, in my team at the time it was 60 people, so I had like 8 new hires in there. And I pulled the 8 of them aside and said, you are all subject matter experts in starting a company without ever meeting person, without meeting any of that team in person. So leadership, management needs to learn from you about what things are missing, how do we have to change things. And you could see these people that were struggling on the side of like, I can't even figure out where I fit in this company. I can't meet people. And we're calling them out to say, no, step up in this way. And it was very empowering for them of like, oh, I can inject, I can inject wisdom here. And I think that, so going back to your original question, it was recognizing, being aware of what it is that's driving you and looking for those fits in the company or out of the company. It's in my case, I had buddies in other companies and I would interview with them, but always it was the fit for me when I looked at what's the overall package at Microsoft, what's the overall package, the opportunity of these two companies. I'd be back at Microsoft, but with the portfolio that Microsoft has, yeah, we could move between teams. Zune was one where I moved. I left the platform team to go into what was Media Center at the time, but we were turning it to Zune. So that was one that I picked. But then Windows Phone was, hey, Zune people, you all that did awesome on this user interface experience, we need you coming with the design team over into Phone. So that was, one of each there.
Now, what happened with the phones? Because I vaguely remember that was a thing, but I guess
That's right. It wasn't a successful thing. And there, it's funny that, in my post, I said my 3 favorite products, the 3 products I'm most proud of were Win95 and Zune and Phone. And, there was some of the, picking comments that were like, oh my gosh, Zune and Phone were terrible. They were failures. Like, well, failure is not binary, right? I mean, there was a lot of learnings that we had. And, for me, what Zune and Phone, what was really special about those two, that's behind the scenes, it's stuff that I'll know that a customer can't necessarily put their finger on, but there was a fundamental different way. It started with Media Center and then it was continued with Zune and Phone, where it's what we call design-led engineering, where in the past you had designers. So you have developers, program managers, testers, designers were kind of the 4 main groups. The designers would show you all these cool ideas and pictures and animations, but then we on the engineering side would say, that's great, but the software, we can't do any of that. And so we were constantly just telling designers, sorry. And there's hilarious, the guy who did design lead at Microsoft is Bill Flora. He gave a talk on this progression. I'll have to see if I can find that link, because it's amazing, where he talks about they're making icons is basically all they could do back in the day, to this point where they said, what if the premise is, what if whatever the designer draws, you build you engineer the system such that you can make that happen. And it was obviously a mindset change. And given that all of us had always just said, the designer comes in at the end and we tell them no, this pivot was, and so I saw it with Media Center and I said, I want to be part of that. And then went in with, and so the main success that I would say out of Zune and Phone was this concept of, designers have lots of really cool ideas. Let them go with it and build a platform that enables that. And so if you think of Zune, you think of all these fluid animations, you think of like high typography and kind of this immersive experience. And then on phone, you had live tiles. Like live tiles is the perfect example of, that was a design-led concept that when we had existing technologies that couldn't do it. We built the technology they needed to do it. And to this day, live tiles are gone. The concept of what live tiles gave you was, on your start screen, without going into any of the apps, you can actually have a little bit of that app running, and it can flip over and show you different things, and you can bring more of the life of the app to your start screen, where the motto of phone was, get in, get out, get back to your life. And it was, we were the people that were saying, the goal of our phone is for you to not use it. They're really commercial with showing where people were using their phones at the time. This is 10 years ago. People using their phones in inappropriate places. The dad and kid on a seesaw, and the kid is sitting at the top of the seesaw with the dad at the bottom texting, and they're saying, really? So it was, I loved that marketing campaign, but the start screen and those live tiles was an embodiment of that, of saying, if I can just glance, if I can get everything I need without even going into the apps, then to Jack's point of, wait, I'm now looking at this picture, which now pulled me into this stock and whatever, like, well, no, I can kind of just get a glimpse and then go out. So that's the success. I mean, you can say the downside is we didn't get the apps. It's all about getting the apps. We didn't get the app dev story set up quick enough, and we didn't get the right channel to get people building apps. And so that's, I think, ultimately where phone lost it.
No, I appreciate your story there, because I think it's very easy, especially for the folks on Blind, where they write about being disappointed that they're on kind of the unsexy project or the product that gets killed a few years later. And they kind of tend to think or reflect on that time spent as time wasted.
Mm.
But you're actually saying, well, no, there's a lot of hard skills that you learned. And also, those experiences add to your kind of collective work in terms of saying, well, actually, I can actually now reflect back, and now I have those business lessons that will inform my work going forward, whether I stay at my role, stay at that company or not. Are there any other kind of tips that you could share for those folks that are kind of disappointed in terms of working on the quote unquote unsexy projects or the weird companies and like odd industries?
Yeah, no, it's so true. I mean, it's easy for us to discount once there's a failure. Any failure can now grow to being, the failure in this aspect becomes complete failure. And I think that the main tip is, nothing's black and white, nothing is complete, and recognize where the successes are. A phrase I always used at work was, celebrate progress though short of perfection. And it's just, you have to capture like what was good about this, and this, so what do you have now in the engineering, in like agile development? you have this concept of retrospectives. You do an iteration for a month, then when you're done, you have a retrospective. And just the idea of take time, step back, and reflect on what went good and what went bad in that last month. And I think so the more of this agile, I think, gets people to where they don't feel so complete in the failure. But it is a challenge. And I think that it's perpetuated by more binary reinforcement of that, of like, yes, you're right, it was a complete failure. It's much easier to just say Windows Phone was a failure than saying, well, it's nuanced. There's nuance way more than we talk about these days. So I think the main tip is just don't do the retrospective and be objective. I think the earlier that you build this objectivity into what you're doing, you're a neutral observer. This concept of actor observer, that you do, and then you step back and look at what you did, and that's a muscle that you build. That's a mindfulness is what you're building there. But it's a muscle that the more awareness of this, of you observing what you're doing, impartial observer, you're not judging, you're just looking, and then there'll be a time when you're going to step back and look at that, and the more frequently you do that, the better. But I think that's a lot of what do they say, when you point the finger at one person, when you point the finger at someone else, there's three fingers pointing at you. Don't The easy way out is, it didn't fail because of me, it failed because of them. Look for what was your part in that. And then again, don't beat yourself up. So what were the successes? What did I do right? What could I have done better?
But is it fair to say, though, given the experiences you and your team and everyone else has, then led to that, start me up 1995, and then it became ubiquitous, all, Windows 95. And then from there on, it just was a rocket ship. So in part, doesn't it take some of those iterations that may work out, may not work out, but then you're learning, and then you hit it, and you get lightning in a bottle, and then, right? Is that fair to say? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, there's sometimes when success is easy, and there's time. I mean, easier. It was a simpler market there, and what you had to bring, and how you had to bring it, I think was a lot of grit. But we knew, do we execute on this? And we know, it was a sparser field, and so it was easy to bring value into that. I think that there's a lot of dilution, not delusion, a lot of dilution now, where I think there is how do you differentiate? I think is a big challenge. But I think that is important, is for people to think about that differentiation. In this, with Blind, with people talking about with career growth and all that, I think there's a lot that is what is the differentiation? How do you uniquely add value? And this, Jack, I've read some of your articles about, finding, you finding your brand, you finding that you've written about, that I think is spot on. There was a great, Satya has, I'm probably not going to get it exactly right. He has a quote for the company that he says, the employees, it says, use Microsoft as a platform to realize your dreams or to pursue your passion. It's something like that. But that was a really important pivot on that, where he's saying, you didn't come to Microsoft to be on the Windows team, to be in this. You came, you have some drive, you have some personal interest, some personal passion, and figure out the second statement. That's the soundbite that we use. The second statement is, figure out something you're doing that aligns with Microsoft's mission and culture, and go after it. And this empowering of that is, but it can't work that you just say, well, I'm just going to do whatever they told me to do. That's calling out that leader in you and saying, what is your SME? What can you add value here in a way that no one else can? And that differentiation, I think, is, in the world of AI, if you're not creative, AI is going to do it for you. So you better be creative, you better be differentiated. And I don't know if that's a challenge for people, because they say, I'm not a creative person. Well, creative, if you think that you're creative or not, no, but it's the habit of creating, similar to the habit of observing.
I mean, double clicking on this like concept of creativity, you spent a long time at Microsoft and you had the opportunity to create your own role, your own position. Can you walk us through that experience in terms of what it was like to propose that and say, you know what, I want to get into this concept of learning and development, and perhaps that discipline or that function didn't yet exist? How did you make it a reality?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that is a very good like culmination to look at. So I think you picked on a good one there because, and when after I had pitched this and after I landed the role and announced to the team, my my blog post that followed that was explaining the evolution of pitching that I had done at the company. That started as pitching a feature, and then maybe it got to pitching a product, but then the culmination is you actually pitched a role. Now, I guess I could go beyond that and say I can pitch an entire division, but no, I didn't. I
Right.
didn't get that far. But that progression of the building the muscle is success begets success here. That keep pitching and keep learning. It's both that the company is finding more putting more trust in you. It's also you believing, like we said with creativity is, oh, I can create more. I can keep doing more here. And the learning and development role was we have learning and development. My whole premise is HR, our human resources team, is there for learning and development. The problem is when you're a 200,000 person company, tell me that you, HR, a central corporate function, can satisfy all the learning and development needs for 200,000 people. It's a huge portfolio. And looking at that and going, well, you guys are doing great over there, but we can supplement that. And so this idea that what I had pitched was let's do learning and development in the orgs that hub and spoke, that there's the hub that is HR, and we're the spokes out in the, and we coordinate. So a lot of my time is spent. I have to understand, I have to have internalized and completely understand what HR is trying to do. So I'm not cross mission with them and then say, okay, great, you're doing this, you leave off here, and we're going to fill in from there and add value. And so that was the pitch that in my org, my manager, my skip, as we call it. So it's your direct manager and then the manager above is your skip. My skip was saying he's a CVP, a corporate vice president. He has the scope and the money to back it up to say we want to try this thing, and he was really for it. He actually approached me before I ever wrote the pitch saying, you're really involved in doing this learning and development as 10% of your time, doing 90% on the engineering. Would you like to flip those? I'm like, well, I was actually thinking flipping it all the way to 100%, but so there was you in terms of the brand that I was saying with Jack earlier, that you establish that brand and people come. So it was amazing that when he suggested that, I'm like, oh, I was writing a pitch already. So it was definitely a win-win there. But yeah, I can't think of a more satisfying feeling at the company than defining a role. Like it's not just what I'm going to do part of my time. It is my job at this company is going to be to do it and get that blessed was very cool.
So for folks who aren't quite there, they have that sponsor or mentor that you did in a corporate vice president that had, the influence, the scope, the money, the funding, um, to bring it into fruition. For those who might have to earn a bit more stripes, what advice do you have for them in terms of, you know, finding a role or a niche for themselves and making it into reality? How do they pursue that?
It's a good question. Uh, I'm going to keep quoting Satya, or I think Satya
Please.
was quoting someone else here, but trust is consistency over time. That is a great statement of, you're going to build trust. Trust doesn't there. The old line we had at Microsoft was there are no shortcuts. There would be people who would come into the company, they would see what other people have done and say, I'm going to do that. And they try to, shortcut of this person is operating as a partner or whatever, and they're trying to shortcut to get to that. Like you didn't see everything that person did to get to that. And I think that so that there are no shortcuts was trying to remind people of put in the reps, that now
Right.
I'll switch to James Clear with Atomic Habits and say, what are you doing repeatedly? And the idea of build the muscle around it. So I think the biggest thing is don't expect trust to come overnight. And then realize that, if the equation is trust is consistency over time, how are you demonstrating consistency? So what are you doing intentionally? And going to your brand, your mission, your purpose is, how are you showing up every day on the little things? The little things add to the big things. It's not, people don't, it might be easy to notice, well, this person went off and created a new role, but to get to that part was, well, we're building training programs that we need for this team, and I'm fostering. I had 80 different people that were making trainings from out of the team, and so just showing evidence of this, that there's a track record that you could do it more. So it is the intentionality. The important thing is build a plan, and it's your own plan. And you talked about a sponsor. I love a friend of mine has a personal advisory board, which I think is, I think we should all have it. And I would encourage, that's another thing to do, is who are the people, who would you seek out to be the mentors and advisors to make that happen? And this is in our learning and development in Microsoft. There's a form you fill out when you're kind of evaluating, where's my career at and where do I want to go? And they say, what are your ambitions? What are the steps you're going to take? In the next year, what are the steps you're going to take to move forward? But the third one is what stumped me, and it was a good awareness moment for me of like, who are going to be your advocates? Who is going to sponsor you in this? I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm not even thinking of where my network can help me here. And it's just a great, you think of LinkedIn now, and I mean, it's so easy to build this very broad network. And so I think the idea of the advisory board can certainly help. Come up with a plan and then say, who is going to help me get there?
It's interesting. We had another guest, Neil Dar from PwC, a vice chair. Same. That was the first time I heard that for
Yeah.
the advisory board, right? So it's interesting. So that there must be something to it when you start.
Yeah, we've heard it twice now. Let's get a
The
third
smart,
one.
accomplished people that this is something you should look for people to look into. This was great about the podcast too. You get to share this advice distilled from various people to kind of turn them on to things.
No, and I truly appreciate that advice, Jeff. And I think it's safe to say that I think a lot of folks that are listening might now consider you part of their personal board of advisors for listening to this episode.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
thank you for coming on the show, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
That's awesome. Loved it.